All right, everyone. We'll just get started. If you guys forgot my name from Saturday, I'm Shannon. And I will be teaching your lesson on arrays part 2. So you guys learned a couple methods last class, like index, of, and length, and slice, and whatnot. So today we're going to learn some more methods, and then we're going to get it nice and complicated and do arrays inside of arrays. It sounds a lot scarier than it actually is. So let's start off with some methods. So the slice method is the slice method is good for like making copies of portions and stuff like that, and it often gets confused with splice, but they do totally different things. The splice method doesn't mutate your array. It instead makes a copy and then, roll that back. The slice method makes copies of sections. The splice method mutates your arrays, but it allows you to get in and either take things out or add things to the middle, the end of arrays. And so similar to the slice method where you put your start index as the first argument, you will do that as well. So the second argument, though, is actually where you will end, or like where you actually want to take your, the second is the number of elements that you want to remove. So the first one is like where you will start. The second number that you'll put in is where you want to, or how many you want to remove. But you can put in 0, so you're not actually doing it. But that's the index where you want to do some action. So the third argument, or as many arguments as you want, is what you want to put in. And then it will return the array with all of the removed elements to you. So you can capture that and use it for later if you would like. So it will mutate the original array and then return all of the things that you removed. And then if you passed in 0, it'll return an empty array. So for an example, we have an array called names with George, John, and Jack, or Thomas inside of it. And we're going to create a variable where you splice at the first index and you take one element out. So what do you think will get returned to you?
George and John.
Yeah, John. Because it's at the first index, you'll remove one element, and that will return to you an array with John. So if you console log names and single-term precedence, you'll have the original array that has been mutated, and then you'll have the return of an array with John in it. All right.
You did 2 there. John and Thomas would have been.
Yep, the last 2. So with more examples, so we have names with Paul, George, John, and Ringo. And then you create a variable across the universe where you splice from the first index 2. And just as you said, if you console log those, you'll get Paul and Ringo, and then George and John is saved. Because that is from the first index 2 over. And so it kind of puts them all together. So as I said, you can also use splice to add in elements. So you can remove and add at the same time, or you can just use it to add places at middle indexes. Add things at middle indexes. I'm great at talking. So we're going to go back to our old array. And, except for there's a name in there that is not the iconic Beatles, Pete. So we're going to splice him out exactly where he is, and at that point replace him with Ringo. It will place it in order. So if you, at that order, it'll take it out and place something right there. So it won't put it at the end. So that looks like Paul, George, Ringo, and John. And then it'll return Pete. A lot of times people don't need the values taken out, but it's really great to know that you can. Yeah?
If you didn't have the let and the new one,
Mm-hmm.
could you just run the final part of the code just to mutate the original array?
Wait, let's see. I have to click through. Okay.
So if you just ran like get rid of let former members and the equal sign, can you just run names.splice to one ring up? And then console log names and not need a let former members exist?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can.
How would you call it? Or how would you console log it?
Just console log names and then Pete disappears.
Yeah. So what happens is you're by not grabbing it with that variable, you're kind of not giving a point of reference for where it should return that array. So even though it returns it, you don't have a way to reference it anymore. So it'll still return it, it just doesn't have anything for you to reference. So these are like functions that are actually attached to arrays. So in the back end, it's doing all of that and returning the array of the removed things. But since you didn't capture it, there's no reference to that at all, and then you can't use it again.
Okay.
Yeah. So it'll still get performed. It's just not having anything to like grab on to the return value. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as I said, if you pass in 0, it doesn't remove any elements at all. So this is great if you kind of just want to get in to add something in order, which can happen a lot. Like if you're trying to make sure that things stay in an ordered array, because that allows you to perform other actions much more efficiently if you know that everything's in order. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So let former members equal name.splice to 1 string Ringo.
Yes.
So 2 is P.
Yeah, 2 is the second index. It's the start index.
1 is George.
1 is the number. So this 2 is referencing at what point in the array you're going to start the function.
P.
The second argument is how many elements that you're going to remove from the array. So at this one, you start here, you pass in, I'm going to remove 1 element, so it pulls Pete out. And then the third argument is, and at that spot, I want to put Ringo in. Yeah. And the only required, well, no, none of these are all optional. None of them are required, but it's kind of like, if you called splice with no arguments in it, then it would just do nothing. It would return an empty array, and the array would still be the same. If you pass in 2, it will return, like that's where it'll start. Yeah.
So 2 is the second index. 1 is the number of things it's taking out, and Ringo is what it's replacing with the second index.
Yeah. And this one, because there's like all the elements are kind of like, or all the arguments kind of have a different purpose. It gets pretty confusing. So like this is one that I look up on MDN all the time. I look up the documentation constantly, and I can show you what that looks like.
It could be like 2, 1, string Ringo and string Josh, and
Yep.
then it would put in Paul, George, Ringo, Josh, and John.
Yep.
Okay.
Can you does it have to be 1 string where Ringo is, or can you add several different strings together?
You can add anything that you want. Like you can use this to pass any value. It could be a primitive, it could be complex, it could be array, it could be a number, because arrays can hold anything. So you're just telling it what element to put in. So if you did like a novel and then a comma and a 2, it would have a novel to John. Like, yeah. Let me see. I want to show you. So this is the MDN documentation of splice. And you can see, like, here's the syntax, and it's kind of scary because there's, like, all of these brackets in here. Anything in a bracket, okay, I lied to you earlier. Start is required.
Sorry, is it possible to zoom in on it a little
Yeah,
bit?
absolutely. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, let's scroll up. So I lied earlier. Start is required, but anything in a bracket is optional. And like they've gotten much prettier in their documentation, so there'll also be in their definitions the optional next to it. The start is required. So you'll see like what all of the arguments are that either have to be or can be passed to the function or the method, and then there's definitions below it. and also the return value. So this is, for me, this part is the most valuable, and there's like examples down below and stuff. But like if you need to reference, which I do constantly, like exactly what it's expecting and like what it will do, and sometimes they'll be documented like little weird things that if you don't pass this is what will happen. So that's really great, and that's just, you can just Google like MDN. It stands for Mozilla Developer Network, and it's JavaScript's documentation. So let me go back to the lecture. Any other questions? Yes.
So in the slide,
Mhm.
just there wasn't a start, but in the MDM there was. I just got a little bit lost on why there was no start here and there is a start there.
Let's see. In this one? Oh, wait. Sorry. I'm still getting used to this. So names.splice, this is the start. The start index.
So it was just
So 0, 1.
But in the MDN it used the word start?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you don't have, you can pass, there, it's just what they call the argument. But you could pass in whatever you want. As long as you refer to it within the function later on or whatever. Like that's just what they call it for like any function that you write. You know how you could pass in any argument name, and then inside it you reference that all the time. So they just labeled it start when they wrote the function. Yeah. All right. We did go through this one. I skipped. There it is. Okay. So you don't have to remove any elements. So for this one, that's what they're doing. They're starting at the second index. They're telling it, don't remove anything, just add these after the second. So it'll always go after. So that would look like Paul, George, Pete, Stuart, Ringo, and John. And as I mentioned, if you don't remove anything, it still returns an array, always. It's just empty. All right. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? Yes.
So splice will take things out and replace them, and slice will just copy them out?
Yeah, slice makes copies for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't pass anything to slice, it will just return a copy, which people do all the time because they want to like mutate it, but they don't want to mess up the original one.
Sure.
Um,
David showed us an example with a string where he used slice, and it was like reducing the number of characters in his name one at a time in a loop.
Yes. So yeah, because slice.
Isn't that reducing?
Yeah. So what David was doing in that example is he was passing slice 1, so it was starting at the first index, so 0th first, and then it'll copy the rest for you. So that's the start index. It'll copy the rest, and then so now it's
the first one.
now his name is Avid.
Got it.
And then that's the string, and it'll keep going down because it's making a copy. Okay. So it wasn't actually mutating his name. He was just passing a reference to the string that kept getting cut down, and then made a new copy, and then made a new copy.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, so the join method. The join method concatenates, which is a very computer engineering term that I'd never used until I started writing code. It concatenates the elements of an array into a string for you. And it makes a copy, obviously. It doesn't change the array. The array is still there, but then it returns a string that has all of the values combined into that string. So going back to our Beatles, when you call names.join, it returns a string that is all of the elements. And then it doesn't show you, but there's quotation marks around that whole string. So with the join method, you can add a separator. That's the argument that you can pass in. So the other one you saw, it was just an empty function call. Or invocation of the function. It defaults to a comma, and just everything's slammed together. But you can pass, so this is actually a space, the word and another space. And it's always a string that you're using because you're making it into a string. So you pass a string value of what you want to separate each element. So this, what do you think it would say?
And memory.
Yeah, it's very bad English.
Would you use this to make like an array into a CSV file? Is that what this is for?
You could, CSV files are just comma separated for each. I mean, yeah, you could do that then. I've definitely written programs to like parse CSV or create CSV, and join is really useful for a lot of different algorithms that you'll write when you're doing array manipulation. It's great. Like I use it a lot because I'll split up a string to get in, since strings are immutable. So I'll split them up a lot, and then I'll use join to put it back together to return my answer. Yeah, it's pretty useful for a lot of different reasons, but yeah. So, oh yeah, let me go back. Any more questions about join? So yeah, so a lot of times, like, sometimes I want to make the string complete without anything in it. Like, I don't want the comma, but I also don't want to add anything else. How do you think that I could do that? If I just want all of the elements in the string to be right against each other. It's okay if you don't have any ideas, but you can pass into the join method, you could pass an empty string as a separator, and then everything will be smashed together as one string. Yeah. That's probably what I use more often than anything else. Okay. So, am I going too fast? Do you guys have any questions about anything else? Okay, I'll move forward. Finally, there's concat. So, like join, concatenates everything into a string. Concat will take two arrays and make them one array. So all of the elements will be one. It doesn't mutate either one. It actually returns a new array. Yeah. So the format for doing it, though, is that you call one of the arrays, then you call the concat method and pass in the array that you want it to concat on. So that's the older beetles, that's the younger beetles. If you call older concat and pass in the reference to younger, you will get the one array of all of them in order. So the older one will be first, the one that you call concat on will be second, and then it doesn't change any of the arrays. You can also, so like this is a reference to this array, you can just pass in an array as well. You don't have to pass in the reference to it. So if you wanted to like add a couple values onto an array, you could also call concat and pass as an array those values.
What if you wanted to do multiple arrays and there was like another one that said, older, younger, and youngest? Would you just write younger, comma, youngest?
Let's see. I'm gonna check. I don't want to answer wrong, so let me check the MDN. Yeah. So you can pass in, so what this is saying, so it says value n, that means like any number, so value 1, value 2, value until it's over. So as long as you comma separate them, you can pass in as many arrays as you want, and it will return one array in order with all of those items together.
And the brackets?
Yeah, so these brackets mean that it's an optional parameter. Yeah, yeah. So, and that's just like their documentation convention, like how they indicate that this one is not in a bracket, it's required. These are optional. Yeah. All right, let's go back. I'm gonna play this. Click through everything. All right. Okay. So, are we feeling overwhelmed? It's three methods. It's a lot, but you'll get to work on it in the workshop. And then, like I said, if you want to reference the documentation, like I was really mad because I didn't know about the documentation until I had done 3 online tutorials and like was trying at Code Wars and like going crazy because how did all these people know these things that I didn't know? And it was like literally right there on the internet for me just to like look up, and I never knew. All right, so now we're going to talk about nested arrays, which is what it's called when an array holds another like arrays within it. So since arrays can hold anything because they're just an indexed collection, that is their like technical term, they're just a collection of references to anything, either primitive values or more complex values. So it can hold other arrays, like this. So that's an array with 2 arrays inside of it, each hold 2 values. Does anyone have any idea how I could reference macOS? Like if I wanted to call just this value from this array. Because you guys learned like how to reference an item in an array, correct? By its index value?
Related things, index 0, index 1.
Yeah. So it's related things, bracket 0, correct. Bracket 1, because that's the 0th item is this array as a whole. So if I called related things 0, it would return this array. If I call related things 0 and then also the first index on that, so 0, 1, it would be macOS. Good job. Oh, what do you think the length of related things is? Yes. Yeah, so it looks intimidating because there's all of these things going on, and like, you know, nested arrays can be deep. Like sometimes it's like an array with another array in it, and so you can see a lot of these things. But once you kind of start getting used to it, you can break it down and you find tricks like calling it something else. So instead of saying, they said console log related things 0, maybe I would say let like first array equal related things 0, and then I know I'm talking about a singular array, like first array is that. It's really, really useful, especially when you're going back to read it again. Seeing all those numbers can get a little overwhelming.
Oh, so you would console log arrays, first array, index 0. And that would be Windows.
And then that would be macOS. Oh, 0, yes, Windows, yes. Yeah, so like
You have to go through each one and name them all.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
If you're like writing an algorithm and you don't necessarily know how many values are going to be passed in, but you know like the structure of it, you can call it, like you always know there's going to be at least 2 arrays, and your primary goal is to get to this one. You could call it first array. And that's something where it's like if you spend a little bit more time, especially now that you have like autocomplete on your text editors or whatever, it's like really easy to just push tab. Spending a little extra time to name things will save you a lot later, because even when you're in the middle of writing it, you're like, wait, is that the array or is that the actual element in the array? So yeah, but conceptually it's not that intimidating, especially once you work with it a little bit. So sometimes though it's not always the same thing. So like this is a 0th index is an array with 2 elements, and then it's just a string, and then it's another array with 3 elements in it. So knowing how to call and access that can get a little bit confusing. You can still loop through it with a traditional loop, but you do an extra twist. So what they're doing here is like, because you don't know, like when you're looping through, is this going to be an array, or is it going to be a string? Like what's in it? So they did like what I was talking about, where you capture the element is whatever this index is in RSVP groups. So we're just going to call like, I don't know where in the iteration it is. It could be any of these things. So I'm just going to reference from the original array this index position, and I'm going to call that element. And then I'm going to call the function array is array on that element. So I know, like, am I dealing with another object that I have to dive into, or is it just a value that I can then process? And then, if it's an array, you can loop through an array. So this is, I remember someone was talking about naming, like every time there's a loop in a function, do you have to change the variables? And with ES6, it freed you up a lot, so you don't necessarily have to do that. But if you are doing a nested loop, just like a nested array, you do need to change it because otherwise it doesn't know whether you're referencing this I or this I. So
I'm just saying, you said this I or that I?
yeah. So yeah, that's why. So you change it to J, and then it can keep it straight because it's referencing. So I and J are just like conventional things. Usually, yeah.
I just missed the first part, so when you said I and I,
No, that's okay. Yeah. So nested loops can look kind of hectic. So it's really, really important to use spacing and like change your your variable names and stuff like that. But they're not super uncommon. So it will be something that you start getting used to seeing. And it's a convention to name the outer one I and the inner one J and so on and so forth. Although you don't have to, you could name it what you want. Yes.
If you're looking at someone else's code and you're trying to understand what they did,
yes.
line 5, do you like translate that into English in your head, or do you just get used to reading the actual code? Because if I look at it, I say to myself, all right, if the element in RSV groups is an array,
yes,
then whatever. But do you do that, or do you just say if array is array element?
I think it's like when you learn any language and you kind of start making associations. Like I look at that and I'm like, okay, they're checking if the element's an array, like in my head.
Yeah.
And because they named it that, it's a lot easier for me to read that. If it said array is array RSVP groups I, while technically that's totally correct, the computer's not going to be confused at all. It's harder for me conceptually to even follow my own code. So like by naming it that and then passing that in, I'm like saying, okay, they're checking if the element that they're at is an array in the loop. But so see how this is commented out here? A lot of times, especially with trickier logic like this or logic that's hard to follow because, you know, like what step of the iteration, am I on the inside, am I on the outside? So people will comment out what that loop is doing. So it'll be like, so this is saying like, I'm not sure if the string is this is a string or array. So that's what this is doing. Okay, I'm gonna check. So they might do another one like check, like loop, like if it's an array, loop through it, you know, type thing. So like it's really great practice too. Like say like while you're coding to kind of write that out, just to get in a habit, and then like sometimes even like before you even start writing your function, to like think of the steps of logic that you're gonna need to do, write those as comments. So that you can like fill it in underneath, and then when you're done, it's already written out what is going on in the first place. But yeah, so a lot of times, if something's starting to look a little gobbledygook, I'll write a comment on there, just even for my own reference, or if someone else is going to read it. Especially because like I want to make it feel better for people approaching my code. Like I want them to feel like at ease going through it. And able to track everything that's happening. So anyway, so what they're doing is like, okay, if it is an array, we're going to need to loop through it. So the next element is, I'm going to call it name, and that's element at the 0th position of this array. So say the first element we hit is an array, name is the 0th index, which would be referencing, in this case, Jane. But when you're coding, you don't even know what it looks like, but you're like, okay, I know that it's like arrays of names at least. So we're going to console log name, just to make sure, I put console logs everywhere as I'm coding so that I can check and see what's happening. So if it's not an array though, you hit the else loop. So when it hits Jack, it's going to skip this whole block and go straight to else. We're gonna so it's still called element. So even though you skip this, you've run this line of code. So element's still referring to this, and so else we're just going to console log this. So if we're trying to console log all the names in order, so when we're done, what's this going to look like? What is the console going to look like? Yeah, it will do it in order. Jane, Mel, Jack, Rowan, David, Meg. How's everyone doing? Is that really intense?
I just like didn't even watch for a while because it was so intense. I'm just gonna check out now.
It's something where it's like whenever something gets really complicated, you want to like break it down just like step by step. So it's like, what's the first thing I want to do with a nested array? I'm going to hit an element, and I don't know what it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is check. Okay, that's something that's like really easy. Like, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is just check what it is. All right, now what do I do? Okay, let's handle if it's an array, because that's probably going to be a little bit more complicated. So I know that to go through an array, to iterate through an array, I need to loop through it. So I'm going to do another loop, and this is like why indentation is really, really important too. So you can like visually see each little chunk of logic move around and like what fits into what. Because like this if is tied to this else, but this variable is declared above it. So, you know, you're like, okay, I'm going to reference this element because I don't know what it is. I'm going to capture that as a variable so it's easy for me to process it. I'm going to check if it's an array. If it's an array, I need to loop through it. Okay, I can't use I anymore because I already declared I, so I'll just call it J, and that's starting all over. So what this will do is complete its whole loop, so I know that that's handled in order. And then once that's done, it's going to skip the else block and go on to the next iteration. So then I move one over to Jack. Okay, I'm going to capture Jack. I don't know what it is, though. I'm calling it Jack, but like in your program, you don't know what it is. I'm going to check. And if it's an array, I'm going to loop through it all. If not, I'm just going to console log it. And so for that case, it would. And then I is going to move one more over. And then you're going to capture that element, and you don't know what it is, so you're going to check, and if it's an array, which it happens to be, it'll loop all the way through it. It'll skip the else block because these are tied together. And then it will hit the length of our SVP groups and stop iterating. And then you're done, and everything is console logged in order. So something where it feels really, really intimidating at first, because there's a lot going on. If you just like break down logically each step, you actually already know how to do everything. It's just one step at a time, which is true no matter how experienced you are at coding. There will always be a task or a project where you feel really, really overwhelmed. And you like break it down one step at a time, and then it's totally doable. Yes?
Since I and J are declared in the for loops,
Yes.
could you use that variable to concatenate each string inside the array elements with the numerical value of the order that it's in that nested array?
Do you mean like, so it'd be like Jane 0, Mel
1, and then Jack 0, and then Rowan 0, David 1, Meg 2?
Okay, so let's see. So I is 0.
Like, are those variables accessible within the for loop after the parentheses, inside the curly braces?
In here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is obviously.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
You can also reference here what it is. So if you wanted to do what index it is in the outer array, you could be like, let name equal element J, and you want to concatenate maybe the index that it is in RSVP groups, because maybe there's a reason why you grouped those people together. So you would do let name equal element J plus I. And so through coercion, because I is a number.
Yeah.
But through coercion,
Oh, yeah.
it would slap it together. So then it would console log Jane 0 as like one thing, Mel 0 as one thing. And then it would finish that loop, finish that logic block, and then it would iterate on, so I was now 1. It would hit Jack. And then so down here you say console log element plus I. And so it'd say Jack 1. And then you go here after on the next iteration, and I is now 2, and all here you're referencing I, it's still accessible to the outside. It's just, so you could totally use I, and that's a very common use to reference the outer index. Yeah. Any other questions?
Could you also use I and J, like would you use dot splice to add those back into the original array? Or like make a new array that has all the names and numbers in the array, not just the console log, it's actually put it into the array.
So you mean like you want an array that holds all of these values?
Yeah, so the array would actually say Jane 0, Mel 0.
Yeah, so what you would do, you can't declare the array inside the for loop because every time an iteration happens, it will declare a new empty variable. But if you did something outside of it where you declared a variable to hold the array, instead of saying console log name, or you could still console log name because it's only there for developers in your console. Although you should clean them up when you're done. Because people use your console for debugging and stuff, and if they see all of your variables, it's very confusing. But you would say, like reference that array, and using a method that you learned last class, you'd push it into that array, however you want it to look. And then you could call it
to the actual element.
Yeah. So you would say you call it a numbered array, and so you'd say numbered array dot push element j plus, or if you saved name as element j plus the index, and then you say push name, it would show up as Jane 0, Mel 0, and then you'd have an array.
It wouldn't be Jane 0, Mel 0 with dot push?
It would be Jane 0, Mel 0 if you... No, because it happens in order. So, I mean, if you said, like, push Jane, push whatever you concatenate it as, it would be Jane 0, Mel 0, because it's in order. Yeah. Splicing so that it was, like, in that order would get very, you'd have to, like, that's when you would declare a variable inside the loop, push that variable before the loop's over, and then you get a fresh one again. So you could do it that way. And like concat things, yeah. And you can get all kinds of complicated if you want, but yeah. Just remember that anytime I increases by 1, it's a whole brand new set of logic. So all of this starts clean. And it's just referencing a different spot. So anything you declare inside of a loop will get overwritten every single iteration. And that's okay, because sometimes you want to. Sometimes you only want that thing to exist for one iteration, do something with it, and you're totally cool with it going away. But if anything you want to hold on to, you have to declare outside of the loop. Otherwise, it will get overwritten with the next iteration. Anything else? All right, let's see what's next. Ooh. So, grids are fairly common, especially in like interviews, just to like see if you can handle nested arrays. In that case, the way that they do that is the inner array, so any of the elements within it, represents one of the rows, whereas the index represents a column. It's a little kind of weird to think of until you see them where they format it and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, so let's see. So let's say the grid starts, and it's still gonna be a nested array. So if you laid it out in a long line, it would just look like one long line. But if you hold it, so each element is a row. And that each element of the grid array is a row. Each element of a row is a column. So now you see like the grid forming. So if I wanted to show, here, wait. I'm going to start over. Some people probably saw that. But if I wanted to show just the column, how would I reference the column? So how would I reference this one?
0, 0.
Yeah, grid, the 0th element, the 0th position. And then this one. It's
1.
yes, 1, the 0th position. And then this one, 2, 0. Yeah, so when you're referencing it, the second number is always the column index. The first number is which row you're at. And so when you're referencing, if you're referencing a grid, the second number is always the column index. So like in the brackets, the second bracket is always the column. The first one is always the row that you're at because it is in the outer array. So it is the 0th element, the 0th row, the first row, the second row, and then the column is always the second. This is kind of like a lot of writing code. I have to like draw it out and see things moving and like see where things are. So this is where like a paper would really help because conceptually it's kind of hard to hold on to what's happening. But yeah. So that would return, what would this return?
You mean the array?
Yeah, what would if I console logged first column, what would that what would that return?
1, 1, 1.
Just like like a string?
In an array, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's creating a new array, and each element in the array is referencing each one. And yeah. There you go. Okay. We made it. Any questions? I can go back to slides. Any slide. Talk some more.
Go back for a second. So
Yeah.
see what
Yeah. There you go.
What's the point of making a grid?
Grids are used quite a lot in interviews. Yeah, to give you to like see how you're handling nested arrays and processing them and like.
So it's just an intelligence thing.
It is and it isn't. Like they are used. Like if you're going to represent a table.
Yeah.
Of values, it would be a grid, and you would keep things like that. And so like say you're storing like someone's record, and if they have missing information, there'd be a null at that index, where everything is, and there would be a reference to where that index is. But they're really useful just for handling nested arrays and transforming them and stuff.
So it's like good practice.
Yeah, and it's just like a great example for showing like nested arrays and how you reference it. Yeah. So there you'll see them come up. In fact, I think there's an optional project for bootcamp prep that will allow you to play with grids, and get practice with that, as well as like working on a more complex project. But yeah, that's what it's really useful for. Yeah. I don't like grids as much as I love JavaScript.
I think I need to see it on paper.
Yeah. Well, whenever I have to work with a grid, I use a lot of paper. I like draw all over the place.
When you type in the computer, you're supposed to do it like that.
What do you mean type in like?
Well, because that could be one line if you wanted it to be.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was saying. So like, it's easier to see when it's all formatted like that. And a lot of times, like if you're being kind to your the programmers to follow you, you can format things like this because JavaScript doesn't care.
Yeah.
JavaScript is a language that doesn't care about indentation. So it allows you to format things so it's like visually clear. So like that's another tool that I use a lot of times when I'm writing some kind of like interesting logic specific for my use case, is like I'll kind of use my indentation to kind of like keep things like this instead of spread so far out that you kind of lose track of where you were before. Yeah, so it could easily just be 1, 2, 3, comma 1, 2, 3, comma 1, 2, 3, end of the array. But to explain like how a nested array can reference a grid, you can see it like that.
So when you say you use a bunch of paper, draw all over it in this case, it would be probably to take something that's in a line and formulate it as a grid so you can figure it out in your head.
Yeah, or like if they were like shift all of the column, like swap their places. Sometimes I need to like see like the pattern of movement first so that I can kind of figure out, or like I need to draw it out to see like even what my code is doing. Like what step is it at now, and what step is it at now, and what step is it at now, and kind of so I can visually see like if I'm flip-flopping things, like what it looks like. Or if I want to like completely cut off one column, like what does that look like, and each step of the way, am I getting it correct? Yeah.
So a grid that represents 9 cells or 3 rows,
Mhm.
3 columns.
Yeah. So say you had like this grid, but then you had like another nested array that had 9 of these grids. So then you have a triple nested array.
We're inside.
Yeah, so it's like this is one, and then this holds more. Then you have like a whole block.
Rubik's Cube.
Let's say this holds
like-
more. You're saying outside of the brackets on the same lines after the commas.
Yeah, so like if I had one that was like super grid, and it held 9 of these grids,
Sudoku.
it's Sudoku. Yeah.
That's just like-
Or like Sudoku is actually more like. Is it just like 9?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be 9 and then 9 instead of 3. It'd be 9, 9.
Right.
But like you could have things where
Oh,
it's like
okay,
a
so
super grid.
you're saying it'd
But
be 9
Sudoku
cells.
would be like 9 across, and then the next element, the first element is another 9 across, and then the second, so like that is also that's like a big grid. That's a Sudoku grid.
But the 1, 2, 3 in there is actually what was console logging. So that's the I forget the term, but essentially, if it was a word, the word would print out. Or if it was a string, the string would print, right? Or
Yeah. So if I had
what makes
word,
meaning
like
what makes the columns or the what makes the columns is the comma, not the number.
yeah.
Is that
So
right?
this isn't referencing the first, like the 0th index. So the 0th element of each nested array is the first column. So this is saying the first row, the 0th row, the 0th index, and then this is the first row, the 0th index, the second row, the 0th index.
So if like 1 was David, then
Yes.
grid 0, 0 would be David 1, 1.
Yes.
Would print. Okay.
If this had David, it would say David 1, 1.
Okay.
Yeah. This is just to show like how you can like access it like rows and columns. Yeah. So so that would be like something like where if I was processing it and I knew I always wanted the first column, and so that's always going to be the 0th index. So then I can reference, if I wanted to just loop once through and just get all of the first columns, how would I write that? I would loop through, so I'd obviously have like a for loop for I equals 0, blah, blah, blah. And then inside, if I wanted to write, to like populate each one of these, which bracket would I reference?
What's reference? What do you mean by reference?
Like which one of these brackets would I have like plugged into?
Oh, to see the column?
Yeah, to
First
grab
one.
if I wanted that. Yeah.
First.
So all of this would be like, so this would be this would be grid I 0, grid I 0, grid I 0, because each time I is going 0, 1, 2 in that loop, and then I get the first column. It's cool. It's cool. It's cool once you start recognizing patterns. It's all about starting to recognize patterns.
Oh, so if you did I and then I, you would go in a diagonal.
Yeah. So then you would get 1, 2, 3, because then it'd be 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. You play tic-tac-toe.
There you go, there's another grid.
Cool. You guys want to practice?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, so we learned. So you learned some joining and splicing and dicing methods, which can be useful. And nested arrays are probably the little bit more intimidating one. The great thing is that for any methods, because there's more methods that we taught, you can always look it up on MDN. That is my JavaScript Bible. And yeah. So here's the project I was telling you guys about. Sudoku. I did this one. It was a lot of fun. I used REPL to build it, and then I could just like send it out. It's totally optional. It just helps you to attack a big project into smaller parts because it breaks it down for you. Like first do this. All right, great. Now do this. So if any project feels like writing a big project feels kind of intimidating, this is a great first step into that. You can send it to David or I, and we can go over it and give you some feedback if you want. Yeah.
Do you know how long we have access to the Learn Dot after this is over?
Hopefully forever.
Well, I still have access to Learn Dot, but I don't know if that's because I just gained access again because I'm coming back. But I know that after my after I did Grace Hopper, I still had access for at least 3 months. So there's a lot of time. It's definitely especially if this is all really, really overwhelming because you're going through this really fast. Because I did boot camp prep in a month, and I probably spent a week and a half on it. Just because I was getting really nitpicky, and I would take their feedback and make some adjustments to my code and clean it up and send it back. But it's another great practice to get your tidy code and your comments down so that other people can read. Because I was utilizing that a lot. Because I was I don't know if this makes sense, so let me just throw some comments in here. Yeah, and so this is kind of by the end of class next Thursday. Well, you guys are done on Sunday, so that doesn't really necessarily work. But yeah, I mean, you can send it to me if you want, and I'll go over it whenever I can.
Is it just not released yet? You guys have to release it? Because on Learn Dot it says coming soon.
Yeah, it'll get released.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it's even if you don't get it done and you want to work on it in your own time after the class, it's really great. I liked it. It was fun. And it's actually something, I don't know if it still comes up in interviews anymore, but it is something that used to come up in interviews quite often.
What?
Sudoku. Sudoku type questions. Write a Sudoku checker. If you get a solution. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
I honestly don't even know how to play Sudoku.
I think there's instructions on how to play Sudoku in the project.
I've never even played Sudoku before. Never. My grandma plays Sudoku.
Yeah. Okay. So David, I wasn't able to get access to the pairs generator.
Sure, I'll do it.
Okay.
You have to code your own.
I mean, well, I don't have everyone's names in the program. Otherwise, I could.
It sounds like an excuse to me.
But our pair generator keeps track of the pairs that happened before to try to pair you with new people every single time.
Learning.
Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, very convenient. This worked out well.
You should stop recording if you're still
Yeah.
recording.